Good afternoon, Central Catholic. Welcome to the Alumni Speaker Series. My name is Brandon Haberjack, class of 2006, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement and Giving. We are thrilled to have Michael Zajko, class of 2001, joining us today all the way from sunny California. Mike is a co-founder and general partner of Lattice Capital, an early-stage crypto venture capital firm. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, we've got a great conversation lined up today. Today's topic is Crypto 101. Mike is going to walk us through the basics of cryptocurrency and hopefully give us a better understanding of what it is and how it works. We have a ton to discuss. Mike and I were talking earlier. We could probably do an entire speaker series on crypto itself. So why don't we dive right in? I think it'll be helpful to the discussion to get to know you a little bit, Mike, before we get into the basics about crypto. Mike, can you just give us a little bit of background information about yourself? Where did you grow up and what was your experience like at Central?
Sure. I grew up in Point Breeze on the east end of Pittsburgh and went to St. Bede, which I'm sure many of you know. Like you mentioned, I graduated from Central in 2001. My experience at Central was awesome. I played on the ice hockey team. We went to the state championship my freshman year. Just had a blast, and still to this day, I'm friends with many of the guys that I was friends with while I was there. So a very positive experience, one that I look back on with good memories, and a lot that I still share with the same crew today.
Nice. So I know you're being humble when sharing your hockey experience. Some of the Central Catholic hockey alumni were very quick to point out your prolific goal scoring while you were here. And taking a look at the yearbook, you were voted most likely to go to the NHL out of your senior class. So.
I would have liked to. That would have been, I guess, a second choice to where I ended up.
Awesome. Well, in terms of, going on after leaving school here, what was your college experience like? What was your college experience like? Where did you go to school? What did you study?
Sure. I went to Penn State after graduating from Central and studied biology. For most of the time that I was at Penn State, I thought I was going to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor. I thought that was definitely the path that made sense for me. It wasn't until my senior year that I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So decided to not pursue that path. But given that I decided that my last semester of school, it was one of those points where you kind of say, well, I spent the last 4 years studying this one thing. I don't really want to do anything with it, but I need to figure something else out. So definitely some soul searching after graduating from Penn State, but that was a good path that I never looked back on once I made the decision not to pursue the medical career.
So Penn State, biology, and then I think one of the first conversations that you and I had with each other, probably, 5-6 years ago, you were working for Facebook. So Penn State, biology, Facebook. Take us through sort of the early stages of your life and your professional career and how you found your way to the sort of the cryptocurrency field and industry that you are in today.
Sure. It's definitely a bit of a circuitous path. After graduating from Penn State and not going to medical school, I kind of spent about a year trying to figure out what was the next move, working some odds and ends, and then I ended up doing this public affairs fellowship in Pittsburgh called the Picoro Fellowship. Some people might know it. It's this program that introduces recent college graduates to life in sort of the public sector. During that time, I actually did this like mini rotation with a venture capitalist in Pittsburgh. So kind of just, at least to a certain extent, learned a little bit more about the industry. I didn't pursue the public sector path, and decided that also wasn't for me. But at that point, I decided to take a job at a company in actually it was in New Jersey, outside of New York, called the Nielsen Company. Most people probably know it from They do the Nielsen ratings, which, you know, people know about for TV show rankings. I was working there for about a year. Also, not the path that I think was the best for me. But you know, during that time, I got to move to New York, which was really cool. And once I decided to leave the Nielsen company, I worked for two companies within. Like, it was kind of like when like internet startups were going through their second wave of growth. So obviously, like the first bubble in like the late 90s, early 2000 kind of burst. And then in the mid 2000s to later 2000s, you start to see like the emergence of a bunch of like new internet startups when Google and even Facebook were starting to like first pick up steam. So the company that I was working for was called Clickable. It was an online advertising startup that helped like optimize ads online, mostly for Google search. And that's how I learned about like the online advertising industry generally. And that's what introduced me into Facebook. So moved first to Austin, Texas to work for Facebook down there when in 2011, when I guess the company was probably about like a couple of thousand employees at the point. So definitely like fairly mature, but not what it is today. And it wasn't called Meta yet. So worked at Facebook, had a really good experience, was on the sales team, working with major advertisers on their marketing campaigns on Facebook and Instagram. And I guess I first learned about Bitcoin in 2013. I was going about last night, actually, was like going back into my emails to see like when the first like email exchanges I had related to Bitcoin. And it was in the spring of 2013 with some friends that I had in New York. And the price of Bitcoin at that time was probably around $100. And this is like, it's just funny reading these exchanges that were taking place, people talking about, oh, it's going up to this amount, now it's down, it's crashing, and to see where it is today. But learned about it in 2013, bought a little bit, kind of wrote it down, and largely forgot about it for several years. Fast forward a few years later, I met this guy, Alex Weirn, who's the co-founder or founder of this company that's building on top of Ethereum, which at the time I didn't know anything about. And I met him. He told me about it for the first time. I thought this was kind of a new paradigm, a new way to develop applications that was different from how they had been developed to date. And so at that point, like, got into Ethereum. I caught the bug, if you want to call it the cryptocurrency bug, with Ethereum. And then that was around 2000, I guess, late 2015, early 2016. And then most people, like, when they first really like started to hear about crypto was probably back in 2017, 18, when like the whole like ICO craze happened. And you had all these new crypto assets that were coming out, and Bitcoin went from like $1,000 up to $20,000. So at that point in time, I'd been looking for opportunities to leave Facebook, just like wanted to try something new. I'd been there for roughly 6 years or so. And I had this opportunity to join a company called CoinList, which was at the time and still is the preeminent platform for capital formation within crypto. So basically the ability to buy new crypto assets that are coming to market for the first time. You might call it like a compliant ICO or more regulated path for an ICO, which some people have probably heard the term, which stands for initial coin offering, and probably borrowed from, you know, traditional capital markets for IPOs. Anyhow, that's the path of how I got into crypto. And then like, it's been a bit of a journey from there.
Awesome. I think that, a very relevant topic today, and just kind of, you had mentioned how, crypto has really just exploded recently. I was reading the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and I think they had about a 6 to 8 page spread layout on crypto. And, President Biden today is expected to make an executive order regarding crypto. For the purposes of our conversations here and what we're going to be discussing, over the next half hour or so, I think the audience has varying levels of understanding in terms of, crypto knowledge and crypto lingo. So We're going to start pretty general and then hopefully work our way through to, probably some more in-depth conversations. So at any point, for those that are on today in the question and answer section, if you do have questions for Mike as we're going through things or questions about the terminology, feel free to ask that in the question and answer section. I know that I'm going to be asking questions for my own personal benefit. So with that being said, let's get started with the basics. What is cryptocurrency? What is the history behind it? What's the idea behind it? How did this all start, back in its early days?
Sure. So what most people think of as crypto today all started in late fall of 2008, when a pseudonymous character dropped the Bitcoin white paper on a cryptography message board or cryptography mailing list online, and the guy's name or group of individuals, no one really knows to this day who it was, is Satoshi Nakamoto, published the Bitcoin white paper as a peer-to-peer digital cash. And a lot of the innovations that came from Bitcoin that were published in the white paper had been built and tried in separate instances of how do you create digital money, but had never been brought together into one. So if you want to start with cryptocurrency as a currency, and most people think of like digital money as like the starting point, because it's definitely evolved quite a bit from there. You kind of just like think of money. It's like, well, money is in our pocket. It flows around the world, but it's largely based on a somewhat antiquated system of ledgers held by banks and many intermediaries that decide, well, how does money move around and how is it distributed? So Bitcoin was the first way that you could create digital money. And the way that I typically explain it to people is like, if you started the world today from scratch and you had the internet, you'd want to look, well, we should probably use the internet for money, but it's hard to create digital money because most things that are digital can be easily manipulated. They can be modified, they can be duplicated. So the way that I typically try to explain to people is, if you try to create digital money, and money is just a unit of account of how much people have of it, you'd say, okay, well, I have 1 Bitcoin, someone else has 0, and then someone else has 3. And, the first, I send a half a Bitcoin to someone else. So now they have a half, that's in the ledger. And then they send it to the other person, that's person 3, and that person has 3.5. So this is all just a unit of accounting. And you'd say, well, okay, well, like, why don't we just have one person that monitors that ledger? So they keep account of how these transactions are being sent around online. But how would you trust that one individual? It's, you can't trust them. It's like, if it's a corporation, it's like, well, how do you know they're not manipulating books? How do you know they're not printing more money? And so it could never really be solved. Like, how do you do this? So the innovation of Bitcoin was like, well, let's give everyone a copy of the ledger. Everyone will keep track of all these transactions that are being sent around the world. So now you have this like ledger that everyone's holding. You'd say, okay, well, how do we get everyone to actually keep track of it? Like, what is their incentive to keep track of it? So they created what is known as the block reward. So every 10 minutes, new Bitcoin are issued into circulation. And so the new Bitcoin are being issued into circulation. There's some perceived value, or people think, initially they're hobbyists. They think, okay, well, mine, like you heard that term, mining Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So all it is the way Bitcoin works is people broadcast their transactions out to the internet. The miners keep track of those transactions in a ledger. I mean, like, I'm using my hands here, but obviously all this is done digitally. So they're keeping track of all the transactions. I send, half to you. You send 1 to someone else. They're keeping track of all the transactions. So that's step 1. Everyone has a copy of the ledger. Well, that allows for honesty, because like, well, if everyone has a copy of it, everyone can keep each other honest by monitoring the accounts that are being sent. So the person that basically, the next step is who decides to submit the transactions, meaning like, I have the most truthful record of the transactions. So the way it works is there is an algorithm that called SHA-256. It's run where you have to get this like series of numbers and characters to be produced by running this algorithm on your computer. And the first miner that can submit all of the correct transactions, plus they solve this like puzzle, they're the one that gets the block reward, meaning they get the Bitcoin that's produced each time. So now you have the incentive for keeping track of the ledger. Everyone has a copy of it. And you have the first person to solve the puzzle gets to submit the transactions that have taken place over the past 10 minutes. Then the final step is like, well, how do you know that person that wins? How do you know that they're being honest in the transactions that are being submitted? You'd say, well, why wouldn't they just lie and say, well, actually now I have 10 extra Bitcoin. Like now I have 10 extra Bitcoin. And the way that works is they introduced this system called proof of work, which many people have probably heard about, where that hashing algorithm that I talked about, that puzzle requires electricity to be spent. Basically, you have to run your computer program, which requires electricity, which requires money. So you've invested money into this, you've invested the electricity. So it keeps you honest in the sense that now that like you've spent this money, if you submit a false transaction, a double spend, or you give yourself more Bitcoins in that ledger of transactions, all of the other miners will also be submitting their record and it won't match with yours. So you will have unnecessarily spent this electricity even and like tried to put this false transaction in, but everyone else is keeping you honest. So that's effectively how the system works, is everyone has a copy of the transactions and the system keeps you honest by requiring you to spend electricity in order to submit your transaction or be the winning miner for the block reward. Now there's new systems that are being created that don't require electricity, which is like a big rub against the industry more generally, but like that's kind of the history. Anyway, so Satoshi Nakamoto, and I know there's a lot of detail, but like it is super important for everyone to begin there and to understand, where this kind of all began and how it got started.
That's very interesting because I've never heard it sort of presented in that way. I've always gone to do my research online or reading in a newspaper, and they always start with this idea of Bitcoin, blockchain, mining, sort of the terminology surrounding. And I think if you're not familiar with the terminology, it can be hard to put the pieces together. So sort of based on what what you just shared with us, the Bitcoin is the digital currency, sort of a form of digital currency. That ledger that you're speaking of is essentially the blockchain. And so can you speak to that?
Yeah, so there's two components here. There's the Bitcoin blockchain, and then there's Bitcoin, like the unit of account that is sent around. The best way to think of the blockchain is if you think of like every 10 minutes, all of the transactions that are being broadcast on the internet, that are being broadcast to the miners. So let's say each page is one block. And then each subsequent page is a separate block, and they're all chained together. So that's maybe the best analogy for it. Like you are submitting this series of transactions, but it's not sequential in the sense that they are separated into individual blocks, which that constitutes the blockchain.
Okay, great. Yeah. So moving on then, my next question would be sort of in general terms, how do you use it? What can you use it for? And then how can you actually use sort of that digital currency, that Bitcoin or whatever that might be?
Yeah. So initially, and even the title for the Bitcoin white paper, and I definitely don't want to spend all the time on Bitcoin because there's a whole host of stuff to talk about, but it does kind of just begin there. So Bitcoin is peer-to-peer digital cash. So it's like, how can we send money around the world electronically without no central intermediary? So that was like the first intended purpose for Bitcoin and most digital currencies that are out there. It was like a way to send value to other people around the world in a digital fashion using this new technology that's being created. So that's like the first, call it, 5 to 6 years of the cryptocurrency industry. And it's important, like you'll even notice it's called the cryptocurrency industry, because most people are interested, they're like used to currencies, like just like any other currency. Whereas it's evolved today to do much more than just be a currency. And probably the best way to think about this is like, you had this first way that blockchains were enabled is peer-to-peer digital cash. And then people are like, well, there's other things that you could do beyond digital cash where you can use this trustless system with no central intermediary. So people are coming up with different applications. And then in 2013, a Canadian programmer, this guy, Vitalik Buterin, his idea was like, well, why don't we use a blockchain to create, at the time, what they described as a world computer? So if you think of Bitcoin like an Excel spreadsheet, where it's a unit of sort of transactions, the best sort of analogy would be Ethereum is adding computation on top of it where you can run programs. So it's like an Excel spreadsheet with macros. So his idea was like, you should be able to program anything on top of a blockchain, not just a currency. There should be other applications that can be built on top of it. So he published this white paper in 2013 and began development on the Ethereum blockchain, which many people have heard of, which was to expand the spectrum of applications that could be built on top of it, which is like a Turing complete blockchain. It's basically any computer program can be built on top of Ethereum. So 2014, they launched the Ethereum blockchain. That's a new, like, kind of fundamental breakthrough for the crypto currency industry, which is now like being more broadly defined as like crypto assets, because it's like, well, Ethereum isn't necessarily meant to be money, like a currency. It's meant to run this world computer. And what you'll see now is that applications that are built on top of Ethereum, or blockchains that are similar to Ethereum that offer advantages perhaps versus Ethereum, they're not necessarily meant to be currencies or monies. They're meant to be the fuel for these systems. So that's where I think like the industry definitely started to evolve quite a bit, because like, well, it's not just about currencies and sending money around the world. And you'll see this even if you like, many people look at like the rankings of crypto assets online, you'll see that like outside of Bitcoin, most of what like these first generation currencies have started to like slowly dissipate, because most people are like, I don't buy that it's money. And even with Bitcoin now, like most people don't use Bitcoin as money. Like you'll hear it being described as digital gold. And that's fine, because like gold is in a way money. It is a store of value, a unit of account, and it's a medium of exchange. People don't use it, but it's like, it is the hardest money that is available. And that's the like narrative or the thesis that most people that are interested in Bitcoin, if you're like a Bitcoin maximalist, they've attached themselves to this concept of like, this is Bitcoin is digital gold. It is not meant to necessarily be spent in the traditional sense. Like you don't necessarily want to go buy coffee with it. But if you're looking for a replacement for what was historically gold as an asset class that is more modern and offers advantages over gold, then you'd buy gold. Now, all of these other crypto assets can be used for many other purposes, but like Bitcoin is mostly meant to store value. So you buy it as an inflation hedge. So like, just like people buy gold to hedge against inflation, because everyone realized like this is real value. All humans have kind of agreed upon it. Now people are starting to coalesce around this idea that Bitcoin is another store of value for people to store wealth in. It offers a replacement or a supplement to gold as that thesis.
Yeah, and just from what I've been reading in preparation for today's discussion, and you see some large financial institutions starting to make investments into sort of this space, and then also you see sort of on the finance side, portfolio managers starting to incorporate sort of these crypto assets in addition to sort of the more traditional type of, finances. So in terms of, you mentioned a little bit about the advantages of using crypto, for your everyday user, or you're somebody that's just sort of looking to kind of dip their toe in the water with something like this. What would be the advantages to them for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on what thesis or like what you are interested in. First, if you're thinking of like cryptocurrencies or crypto as I'm going to use this to replace things that I do on a daily basis, it's probably like not going to do that. I mean, most people today use it to speculate. Like that's the primary use case. But you can start to see where some of these things, at least if you're in the industry, start to offer advantages over existing monetary solutions. So let's say like your Bitcoin, like the only way to use it, and like I kind of laugh, is like you just hold it. People don't hodl, like you just hold it. Like it's just meant to conserve wealth, and the expectation is because of its cap and supply and the growth of humanity and the growth of demand for it, like it'll grow anyway. So that's like one usage. You're starting to see like people use Venmo, and it feels very much like a modern monetary system. It's like, oh, I have it on my phone, like I send it to my friend, it's in my friend's bank account pretty instantaneously. But it's not really like, it's a nice like modern front end, but it's still run on traditional banking rails. So you're starting to see some types of, like, people talk about stable coins. So it's a digital currency that pegs to the US dollar. So you can send money around. It's redeemable theoretically 1-to-1 for a US dollar, but it's a way to move money around that's not within the confines of traditional banking infrastructure. And like, what are the advantages of that? Like, it is actually instantaneous. So you'll notice with like Venmo, like you can't actually take the money out instantaneously, or you have to pay a fee in order to do it. Whereas like with crypto, there's instantaneous settlement, because you're relying on the blockchain to be the system of settlement, not on traditional banks, which are like, they might take several days. There are different disadvantages too, in the sense that like, once you send money to someone via crypto, it's like, it's final, like that's it. Like it can't be pulled back like you can within traditional banks. So there aren't the same type of safeguards, but it does offer some advantages. And then like, if you wanted to buy certain things, like everyone's talking about NFTs now, like for the most part, you have to use crypto to buy these things, because it exists in this new realm that isn't tied to the existing financial world as we know it. It's like it's almost like it's on an alternate economy. Anyway,
yeah, it was sort of leading into my next point. Now, this whole sort of idea of NFTs and digital art and even digital property, sort of within gaming and such. Where do you see all of this heading? What do you think is the future of this, of this cryptocurrency world? Speak a little bit to that.
So this is kind of why I became interested in. I first became interested in Ethereum versus, let's say, like really going down as like the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Is that its only limitation is kind of the ingenuity and imagination of humanity in order to build applications on top of it. So over the past few years, so like let's rewind to 2017 or so, or even when Ethereum first came out, most people are like, okay, conceptually, we could do anything with this, but we don't really know what we're going to do with it. It's like, we're going to build this, and then developers need to come in and build on top of it. and they had ideas of things that could be built on top of it, but like didn't really know what was going to happen. So if you go back to, I guess, probably like 2018, 2019, the first sort of industry that started to take off on top of Ethereum, which is known as DeFi or decentralized finance, which was a reimagining of the financial infrastructure stack, but built on top of Ethereum, as opposed to building on top of the existing legacy financial stack. And that was the first industry, sub-industry of crypto that started to take off, was DeFi. And I think that is one future trajectory that when you're asking like, where is this all going? Like that is one sector that will totally, at some point of time, replace the existing legacy solutions that we've all relied on. And you've probably, like, people here talk about like banks kind of going away. Most of this will be run on computer software, and namely on these on decentralized finance. Like there might be like centralized front ends that are used, but like the back end will largely, I think probably, I don't know, maybe in the next 10 years, rely on DeFi rails. Then the sort of the next sector that took off was NFTs, and they're kind of I mean, it's largely speculative driven, and probably a bunch of these things will be worthless, not too long. But I think, the innovation that came out with NFTs was, in an increasingly digital world, how do you demonstrate that you own something digitally? So like people are like, oh, well, like I used to buy a record and I'd hold this physical item. It's like, I own the record. This is mine. I own it. But then, things like Napster came out, and they could be shared online. Everything could be copied. And it was like, well, how the hell do we control the digital realm? It's like, we can't control who owns things. Like everyone owns them. So then you kind of came up with central intermediaries, like Apple came out with iTunes, and it's like, Apple would be the central clearinghouse. They would tell you, you own this digital song, or Spotify with streaming, but like you don't actually own that. Apple owns it. You're kind of just like borrowing it from them to a certain extent. So the breakthrough with NFTs is it creates a system that allows people to own things digitally that they could never own before, which is why like art kind of took off first. Because like, oh, well, like I can collect these things. No one else technically can replace them. It's like the meme online is like right click and save. Like, oh, I can right click this photo on the internet, but it's just like I can take a photo of a painting. It doesn't mean I own the painting. Like I just took a photo of it. So you can actually demonstrate that you own a digital item for the first time, which is really the breakthrough. So you can see like, now it's kind of funny JPEGs and like profile pictures, but you could see in the future where it's like anything that you want to own that needs a digital copy of it, that doesn't need a central clearinghouse to hold that digital copy. Like you don't need to rely on someone, can be an NFT can be used for that. So like that's NFT as like a category, but like it can be applied like everywhere, real estate, any record of digital ownership. And then probably more recently, what has kind of gotten people excited is the gaming space. And, again, like this is still kind of nascent, but like if people spend billions of dollars annually on games, it's clear like that's a category of entertainment that people really love, and they build up these characters and they explore these worlds, and they get weapons and swords, and they buy gear, and it's still largely owned by like one single company that people feel like, well, if I am purchasing all this stuff, I should be able to like sell it to someone else, just like I can sell this shirt that I bought. No one should have to hold the key to that. Someone else, like if you're the owner, you should have the rights to do whatever you want with it. But that's not how digital worlds have existed today. It's because there's always one centralized company that owns it. So it's kind of like the next kind of subsector, if you will. Like, so you have a DeFi, NFTs, gaming, and then there's a bunch of like more narrow applications that are being explored that are pretty interesting. But those are probably some of the biggest like categories of crypto, or like what's now being termed Web3, because it's like, it's not just currencies, it's, you know, it's NFTs, it's art, it can be a lot of different things that aren't just, it's not just specifically a currency.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to shift gears just a little bit because I want to be sure that we get to some questions from some of our guests too as well. So we do have a question here that says the crypto market seems flooded with new coins each day. What are key metrics and characteristics of tokens that you look for?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these tokens that are out there are probably going to be worthless at some point. So it's definitely good to try to look for fundamentals in what you might be investing in. What I think is most important to look for is it depends on whatever the team is setting out to do. So I think I've talked about Ethereum quite a bit, and there's a class of crypto assets called smart contracting platforms that are all competing with Ethereum to be kind of this world computer. So some of them are things like Solana, Flow, Cello, Blockstack. There's a bunch of them, and in order to judge the value of one of those, you would look at, well, like, what are they trying to achieve? And what they're trying to achieve is getting developers to build applications on top of them. And then for those applications to start getting usage. So probably the first thing you want to look at is, well, how many developers are actually building on insert new blockchain? How many of those applications are being used? And you'd start to measure, well, okay, if it's DeFi, how much financial value is being locked in those DeFi protocols? Or if it's an NFT marketplace, how much volume is being traded on it? So it largely depends on whatever the project, the specific crypto that you're considering as and you want to get involved with, but it really needs to be measured on whatever they're trying to achieve. So for again, for smart contracts, it might be the things I talked about. If it's an NFT marketplace, it might be like based on the volume that's being traded on the marketplace, how many NFTs are being listed, how many transactions, how many users. So those are some of the like fundamental things you look at. But in crypto, at least in the short term, and this like what causes a lot of the volatility is, a lot of it is being driven by narrative cycles that take place online. So things that are talked about on Twitter, just like the marketing buzz around it. So it's worthwhile to look at fundamentals, like what are they actually trying to achieve, and is that actually happening? And there's a number of sources online to check if what they are kind of representing is real, or if it's just just hype.
Great. Next question here. Is there any concern about governments stepping up efforts to regulate cryptocurrency and or create their own digital currency? And how might that impact the current third-party system of the digital cryptocurrency market?
Yeah, I mean, governments already regulate digital assets in some regard. So within the US, you have the SEC and the CFTC that are the primary watchdogs, if you will, for this asset class. The issue has been that there hasn't really been clear guidance on like what is allowed and what's not allowed. So I think broadly speaking, at least in the United States, which tends to be the driver of global policy, because the United States controls most of like the securities laws around the world, or how most people follow them. They haven't provided much guidance, and I think there's some guidance that came out today from the Biden administration, which sounded pretty light. They're not taking a heavy hand. I do think they will regulate it in some capacity. That's inevitable. But for the U.S., what they can't do is stifle it, because the U.S. and how it's been able to maintain its general sort of dominance within the global economy has been by fostering innovation. So like Silicon Valley, everything has happened here. This is where all the innovation happens. And if you stifle financial innovation or all the innovation in all these other areas, then like the risk is that you lose it to other countries, and then you lose the competitive edge that the U.S. has had for quite a while.
Thank you. Switching gears here to a topic of the topic of Russia. It says obviously that there's some sanctions that have been put in place, given everything that's going on in the world today. Is crypto a means for Russia to invade these sanctions? And if so, how can it be stopped?
Yeah. So if you recall from the beginning of our conversation, we talked about what makes Bitcoin and most blockchains so powerful is this ability for all of it to be broadcast onto the internet. So most of people don't, because it looks kind of scary, most people don't realize it, but all of Bitcoin's history, every transaction that's ever been made is publicly available to anyone that wants to look at it. So if you were looking for a system to hide money and to move and evade government sanctions, currencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these stable coins would not really be ideal, because the transaction ledger is available to anyone, including any bank or any regulator. And to get money out of the digital realm or the crypto realm, you usually need some central intermediary to actually exchange your Bitcoin for dollars. So unless you're going to leave all of the money in the digital world, you need to get it out at some point, and it requires some centralized entity to do it, unless you can go to an individual and say, hey, listen, I'll give you 10 Bitcoin and exchange it to me for $4 million, but or not, I guess it would be, no, $400,000. So unless you can actually make that exchange with someone offline, which is not really that easy to do, it's not the best way to evade sanctions is not through something that's transparent to everyone in the world.
So I think we got time for two more questions here. So my next question here is, any thoughts on the US dollar as a reserve currency and crypto's impact to it? Then also any thoughts on XRP/Ripple and their impact on the pending SEC case?
Yeah, I mean, the US dollar as a reserve currency, which we've held since Bretton Woods, post-World War II. I mean, most nations that have had reserve currency status at some point of time have usually screwed it up by printing too much. And if anyone's kind of paid attention to the news, you'll see that most of the money that's been printed into circulation came into circulation in the past 2 years due to COVID. So it is at risk. I mean, we're experiencing inflation right now. That's obvious. And if you print too much money, eventually that money it devalues, and people don't see it as a place to store wealth anymore, and they lose confidence in it. So most nations have gone through this and lost reserve currency status. Whether or not that's crypto can be the lifeboat, but it's not crypto that's actually, it's potentially offering an off ramp, but it's not crypto that's causing that. It's the fact that there's a printing press that the U.S. has control over, and if they can keep printing money, eventually people realize, well, how much is this worth anymore? So that's the answer to the first question. And then as far as XRP, I don't pay attention to it too much, so I couldn't comment on that individual asset.
All right. So the last question that I have for you is that you reference on your website that partnerships and community are only sustainable moats. What do you mean by that? And how do you establish these communities? And how is a community different from a partnership?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about crypto assets or Web3 is it's all open source software, meaning like anyone can take what the code that you've deployed on chain, replicate it, and they can start their own version of it. And you've probably heard that today where it's like, okay, I've got Bitcoin, and then I see Litecoin, and I've got Bitcoin Cash, and I've got all these versions of Bitcoin. It's like, well, why is Bitcoin Bitcoin? And Bitcoin's Bitcoin is because the community of people around it believe that is the true Bitcoin. So that's kind of the first point on community. Is like, if everyone rallies around one version of that, then like that becomes the source of, you know, what people want to use and what people view as like the real, you know, the real version of it, or the leader. In terms of partnerships, I think the other piece is like most of these software programs that are deployed on Ethereum or Solana or similar smart contract platform are all composable, meaning that they can all interact with each other via code. So if you deploy a new version of an application, but no one interacts with you, like no one's using your code, you're not being interoperable with other applications, it kind of loses its value, because the value of most of these is that they have this, people say like money Legos, like they all kind of click together and work together. So that's what we mean is like, you build defensible moats by like having a community that believes in what you are doing and kind of pushes that forward. And then you have these partnerships in place where people are relying on the technology that you've built and not on some other version that someone else just copied and pasted over. But there's a lot of that goes on. Like there's tons of like copy paste, just take the existing code, start a new version of it, and try to like drive a new community around that. Yeah, that's the answer to that question.
Well, that's all the time that we have here today. Once again, Mike, want to thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise in this field. You know, I think the 45 minutes went by so fast that we might need to have you on again to talk through some of this, and a lot of great questions have come through that we didn't get a chance to answer. So we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you're very busy, so thank you again for doing that. We did record today's session, so if there's something that you missed or something that you wanted to go back and revisit, that will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. So the next edition of our Central Catholic Alumni Speaker Series will take place on Monday, April 4th. We're going to sit down with Bill Garrison, class of 1981, who is the cousin of Central Catholic alum and former fallen Pittsburgh police officer Paul Schullo, to talk a little bit about his life and the impact that he's still having on others today. So once again, thanks everybody for joining from home. Thank you, Mike, for participating today. And we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day, wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thanks, you.
Guys. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you, Mike.
Bye.